Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Digitalk Architects. We have Shayne here with us today. Shayne, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Please tell us about yourself.
So I'm Shayne Adler. I am the co-founder and CEO of AETOS. We are fractional chief compliance officers, which means we step in with startups and SMBs and join the executive team part-time to ensure that their compliance issues in data privacy and AI governance aren't blocking their sales cycle and they can move forward with confidence.
So tell us about, your story of how you got here, your journey in law, operations, entrepreneurship, and then co-founding your consulting firm.
Well, I did not take the traditional route through. I will say that. I graduated law school, and instead of practicing, I found myself being drawn into nonprofit operations. And at the time, that was really compliance heavy. There were a lot of reporting requirements all of a sudden, and I found myself in this world post law school. I really enjoyed the work. I enjoyed working with nonprofits, but I decided I needed to take a hiatus with kids, as many do. And when I was ready to jump back into working, I decided to go by way of getting an MBA. So I attended University of Michigan, did my MBA and with a focus in tech and operations, with the idea I would go back into something similar with the operations and compliance coming together. Because we are apparently absolutely bananas, my husband was also getting his master's of entrepreneurship at the same time at Cambridge, and he did his dissertation on how startups were dealing with GDPR compliance, which is, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's data privacy regulations in the EU. There's a UK version as well. And he found in his research that honestly, the answer was a lot of them weren't doing anything to address data privacy issues. And long term, that was causing them a lot of really expensive harm and slowing down business, slowing down sales. And so we looked at each other when we were thinking about this and said, there's actually a gap in the market, because the options available to them at the time were either hire a full-time compliance officer, which, number one, they don't have enough work where that makes sense. It's too much. No, there's not 40 hours worth of compliance for a startup or a small business, a small SMB to do. Plus, salaries start somewhere around $250,000 US. And on the other side, there's the option of the open-ended spend of hiring a law firm to do the work, which, number one, they don't do the boots on the ground work. And number two, it's an hourly rate that can be, $1,500 or more. And so it was daunting. So we decided to come up with a model that would be accessible, scaled to where they were, and strategic.
Awesome. So on compliance, many see compliance as roadblocks, right? How do you flip that narrative? How can compliance, privacy, AI governance actually accelerate growth in sales for digital first, especially businesses?
I think that companies that are not embedding data privacy at the foundation at this point are going to have to reverse engineer a lot. Number one, it is easier to do it right from the beginning, because retrofitting later on can be way more expensive and complex. But the biggest, the most obvious answer I would say, actually backing up, is with B2B companies, somewhere between 80 and 95% of your clients are going to require you to fill out some sort of security questionnaire. And those can take, I think if it's not prepared, it's somewhere around 30 hours on average to fill out, to get all the documentation together, etc. So engaging in compliance, having all of that ready to go, saves that time, speeds procurement processes. You have all of the trust signals ready to go for the potential client, which can close deals faster. Then on the B2C side, it's going to be a little bit of the trust signals for consumers, but consumers are not as a group as sophisticated as business consumers. It's going to be potential investors and funding opportunities where they're going to look at whether you're engaging in compliance activities, whether you're a safe bet. That being said, it also protects what you've developed over time, because there are situations in which companies have not engaged in compliance when they're building their product. They're not following the data privacy rules and guidelines or principles, and they build their product, and then it comes out in a liquidity event when they're doing an M&A deal or something like that, where they end up having to do something called algorithmic disgorgement, which is a complex sounding way of saying they have to delete everything they built on that data. It's gone, and it severely can devalue a company. We've seen it drop a valuation over 95%. Unfortunately, it's not like it doesn't happen to sophisticated consumers either. It's what happened with when Amazon bought Ring, like the Ring cameras.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not.
What happened?
They had collected data and not handled it in a compliant manner, and they had to delete the program that they had developed. Like, your product is
The
gone.
Ring.
Yes, you have to go back and do it all over with data that is appropriately handled, collected, managed.
Wow, that I don't remember hearing about that. That's pretty big.
It was years ago. It's more of an example to say this example with startups valuation and M&A deal is not an isolated incident. This is one of the standard things that is a consequence if you are not addressing this on the front end. And honestly, it's heartbreaking because, startup founders dedicate so much of their heart and soul, their life. It takes years to build, and you don't want to see that all destroyed because they didn't know. These weren't like evil people wearing black hats, twirling mustaches. They were really good guys who were trying to build something that they were proud of, and so it's not something that they deserved.
So it's very important to handle your data and be mindful and upfront about the compliance of that data collection, right? So you don't lose all that effort into poof, nothing.
Exactly. We do want to prevent that from happening.
So in your experience, especially with the story you just told, talking about startups and small businesses leveraging AI, which is a lot of data now, of course, and we're using AI for everything, including streamlining compliance and operations, right? Can you share some examples of how AI is working alongside teams and like human teams to solve some of those problems?
Yeah, I think that the biggest areas I'm seeing it really work for us at this point, at this stage in development, which, may be different tomorrow or by the time this is airing, it's all of the repetitive tasks. So remembering you need to be logging things, you need to be keeping track of certain things, setting cadences, prioritization. I mean, I love it personally for research. I use it all the time to do my first pass research. It is like having a really good assistant at this point, but the trick is then taking that and knowing what to double click on, knowing what to double check. So putting together flows, workflows, things that understand natural language where you're looking for an example I used earlier today. Please check this for any words that refer to a cadence of time, like quarterly, annually, that sort of thing, and give me a list of where that is in the document. And I was able to use that as a quick reference because I needed to put together my schedule of reminders for when we're renewing certain things, doing certain logging, etc.
Okay. AI tools are advancing at a light fastening speed.
Yes.
But I know that you've emphasized that human oversight is irreplaceable in compliance.
Yeah.
right? Where do you see the boundaries of what should be left to automations and what absolutely requires human touches?
So there are fantastic tools out there for compliance, for GRC, putting together all the documentation for a certification audit. It can work very. So there are fantastic AI based, technology based tools for managing the evidence collection for, say, a certification audit or for testing your system, keeping track of what your users are connected to. We use them all the time. What happens is, number one, there's bandwidth issue, especially in a startup in an SM or an SMB. We had one client come to us. They'd had Vanta for over a year, and that's tens of thousands of dollars. I think is the starting point, at least 15,000,
Mm-hmm.
where they've gotten 3% through what they needed to do for an audit. That, just for reference, should take maybe a couple of months. And so it was just
Right.
burning time on this platform because they were focused on their core product building, their sales, their core business, which is really what they should be focusing on. Um, they don't have the personnel. So you need somebody who can actually take on the workload. And then a lot of the issues we see are less about the technical side of it and more about matching what you say you're doing, what you write down in a policy or a procedure manual, and then what actually happens on a day-to-day basis. Humans are where the equation falls apart in compliance. Just like with a lot of things, it's they forget to log something, or other things take priority and a check doesn't happen, stuff like that. So somebody either designated responsible for, who understands the stakes, needs to own that facet of it, because we get so many emails and alerts and notifications. It doesn't matter how good your platform is if it all becomes background noise when it's reminding you to do something.
Right. Okay. As I've mentioned it to you before, our audience is very, very interested in the intersection of digital marketing, tech architecture, and automations. How do your company consults on aligning technical infrastructure with governance and compliance practices? And how do you go about creating systems for those companies that can eventually scale?
So what we try to do is really go on a bespoke basis. We want to be strategic. We want to look at each business on a and what their immediate goals are, but also we do look at scaling. We want to make sure if we're building a policy today, it's not going to be stale in 3 months. We can it'll be good at least until we revisit it in a year. So having that now, next, later approach to planning out what we're going to do. One of the advantages of coming at this from a business strategy perspective instead of the legal perspective is prioritization. So being able to prioritize things like integrating with the tech stack in a way that makes sense to get at the technical components, the vendor stack, your third parties that you work with, your, all the APIs, all the integrations that make life so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually the biggest exposure risk. That it's often not the company in the headlines that is having the issue with a breach or mishandling. It's somebody in their vendor stack. So like the Target data breach a few years ago, it was actually one of their vendors. So being really diligent about looking at your vendor stack, your tech stack, making sure that
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at who their processors are, what they're doing with the data, that you have data processing agreements from all of them, that make sure they're not, say, training models on your data. If it's AI based, you want to be really careful of that. None of them are selling any data that they're getting from you, because that that risk transfers right back to you. You are equally responsible for what your vendors are doing with data that you own.
That's pretty big, especially with AI now. Everybody building models off of data. that's
Yes.
existing out there somewhere.
Yes. And
So from your
there,
point of
there are
view,
data sets available. Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just saying there are data sets available for training that aren't from, individual users, but it's really important to be checking all of those terms. I mean, I had somebody approach me about a CRM that looked like it would solve so many of my problems in one solution. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, can you guarantee you're not going to train on my data? It said no. And I was like, I'm out.
Wow. I want to know which one. Not right now, but maybe
Yeah.
later.
Yes.
You know what? Sitting, on the other side of compliance, it's interesting because I mean, we work with a lot of CRMs and not often, but there's been a couple of times where, we get asked that question, like what happens, where is the data stored? What happens to the data? Who owns it? All that stuff. But you'll be surprised how many times we don't get asked. And, thinking about it, for their business, is probably pretty important, right? And for our business, it's probably worth mentioning in our contract.
It is, especially if a company does business internationally. It's stating, where you're based, where
Mm-hmm.
your data is going to be going, being clear about where it's being transferred because different places have different rules. If it's being stored in a country that isn't as stringent as your home country, is it going to be okay? There's a
Yeah.
lot to consider.
So, on that note, walk us through what a real client case looks like, and where sort of like smart compliance and AI governance, it's working on their favor and actually unlocking opportunities for them. And I
So
know, just generally speaking, no names. I get that part. We don't have to go there.
we deal with so many different verticals, so many different industries, which is part of why I love doing this. There's so much innovation happening, and I get to talk to people about different types of technology in different sectors and things like that. One of the fun things is getting into pre-product, working with a startup before the product is developed to help them lay that foundation. I'd say one specific case where we had an immediate payoff, or not immediate, but a fairly quick payoff. We helped a company build their data retention policy. So how long do you hold on to data? So that was enacted. It was beginning to be followed. So they weren't holding on to anything too long, and they actually got a litigation hold. They had to stop getting rid of any data, but because they had already been engaging in minimizing how long they were keeping their data, it was not nearly as much in their files. It wasn't nearly as much work. It cut down on potential legal costs to go through all of it, minimize their surface area for risk. Because honestly, I think, it was something very minor. It was one of those things that was going to go away, but
Yeah.
it offered them protection because they just engaged in this simple activity of going through and getting rid of their old stuff.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Let's switch it up a little bit. And let's talk about uh, you. And you are pretty invested in obviously technology, but especially women in tech and entrepreneurship. What shifts have you seen in opportunities for women in tech and compliance? And any advice for founders like you and I carving out leadership roles in emerging technologies, AI, all of that?
I've seen such an interesting shift with women in these newer niches going to a conference, for example, that has to do with something more narrowly scoped, more niche, like privacy or data privacy or AI. It's roughly 50-50 gender split. And I think all of these new fields, because you don't have these legacy players, you don't have older institutions feeding into them, has offered an opportunity to specialize in a way
Mm-hmm.
that is balancing things out. I was at another conference that was more traditional technology, legal, and it was less than 20% female.
That's
So
crazy.
it's a pretty dramatic difference in just how the roles are being filled. I think also if a company is engaging in, more cutting edge technology, that will likely feed into more flexible working arrangements, things like that, that favor women who are often tasked as being primary caregivers in family situations or other things like that that historically have not worked in our favor. But all of these opportunities still exist for women to launch into these new fields, even though it's evening out. And I think connecting with each other, having conversations, sharing insights, it's giving us a chance to shape our businesses in a way that works for our life rather than making our life work for our work. And I think
I don't
across
know.
the board, that benefits
We work
everybody.
pretty hard.
I know I work all hours, but I block off the time I need to say, pick my kids up for school, and then I get back on the computer. I work far longer hours at my current work that I do it than I ever did before. I set them, and it's at my own, at my own peril, I guess.
I know. I think that's the one advantage of, having a business. I know we wear a lot of hats, but the flexibility it provides for women, where we're the primary caregivers for our kids, being able to just say, I gotta go, my kid needs me, without having to ask for permission, it's a big deal.
And I tend not to be the frontline parent for those calls these days because I am so busy, like you said. But
Mhm.
being able to set aside the opportunities and the time I do need and want to take advantage of, an activity or something that I can block time off for is really nice, because one thing you can never get back is time.
It's true. All right, let me ask you a little bit about, um, let's continue on the AI topic just because it's so big these days. With AI related risks, should founders be thinking about? I guess the question is, what should the founders be thinking about as regulations change, and any predictions you see coming up in data privacy laws, in AI oversight? I'm sure there is lots in the government is doing a lot about it. They're talking a lot about it. What do you see affecting businesses short term, I guess?
So while there's a lot of noise around laws, regulations, bills, etc., I think data privacy and AI regulation are all founded on these consistent principles that have carried through. That's why we have our proprietary concept, privacy principles by design. You'll hear privacy by design, embedding privacy, data privacy into business model or a product. But the principles are really at the core of it. And I think for founders, for businesses, focusing on those rather than trying to get ahead of whichever bill is going to go which direction is going to get you most of the way there. So things like minimizing what data you collect, limiting data to the specific purpose you collected it for, retaining it only as long as you need, those sorts of principles. With AI, it's going to be, if you're training a model, like, do you have the right to be using the data? If you're deploying AI, how does it affect people? Do you have a human in the loop of decision making? Is it going to have an irreversible impact on a person in a meaningful way? So thinking about those is going to, like I said, that'll get you most of the way there. Then you can start to look at the actual applications of it. So I think that's really at the core of it. It's almost like, I don't want to use the word ethics because it's so loaded, but there's like a core of ethics that goes into it. It's like, just don't handle other people's data in a way that you wouldn't want your data handled.
All right. So for our listeners today, And obviously, a lot of our audience is founders. What would be one or the first actionable step that they can take today to stream their compliance and AI governance programs without all that bureaucracy, and if that
without
makes
hiring,
sense?
without going all in. No, today, like right now, anybody could sit down and in less than 5 minutes think about one area of their business that collects data. You know, most companies have, say, a CRM, and take a look, write down in plain language what your policy is about it. Like, we keep data as that is submitted voluntarily, or we collect data from the internet. We hold on to it for X amount of time. Just a couple of bullet points, and then look at whether that is aligning with how you think that you would want, another one of your vendors to handle your data, whether if you're giving it your data to, say, a store or a service provider, like your personal data, like your home address or something like that. How would you want them to handle it? And then maybe think about putting some policies or procedures in place, or if you have policies and procedures, why aren't they being followed? So just look at what's actually being done and map that to what you think should be done. And you could do that with one part of your business every day in, like I said, probably under 5 minutes.
Very well. Well, thank you for coming out and spending this time with us and making people aware of compliance in general, but honestly, the risks of non-compliance.
I don't want to be the boogeyman. I really don't. I do think it can be leveraged for growth, but it's like insurance. You don't want to think about it until you really
until you need it.
Like the help with compliance. So no,
you want to have it, you just don't want to have to use it. That's how it works.
The insurance, yes, you
in a sense,
the risk. So and if you have the compliance on the front end, you don't need the help on the back end. So yeah, it's a tough concept, or a tough topic, I guess, not a concept, to have to face, because it's less fun, but it's necessary.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for spending the time with us. Thank you for being here for our audience. For everybody else, thank you for taking the time to listen, and we'll see you in the next episode. Take care.